Good afternoon, everyone. How are you? My name is Nat Zappia, and I am the Director of the Institute for Sustainability at Cal State University Northridge. Thank you for coming. For those of you who are returning back to our webinar series, and for those of you who are here for this first time, thank you for coming. I'm going to talk a little bit about the project, about the goals of the webinar series, and some of the organizers of the event. But first, I wanted to, this is a session about traditional ecological knowledge and tribal and indigenous communities focused on aquaculture. And as such, I wanted to turn it over to my colleague, Matt Tutimes, who's going to be, I'll give you his bio in a second. He's going to be sharing his work, but he wanted to, I'm going to turn it over to him to start off with an acknowledgement and a blessing, and then I'll tell you a little bit about the project. So I'll turn it over to you, Matt.
Thank you, Nat. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Matthew Tutimes. I'm the nephew of Chief Ernie Salas Perez Tutimes. And traditionally, we would always start our gatherings with his prayer. And he recently passed away this past year. And so it's tough for us to continue this, but we need to continue his legacy. And so hearing his words is just a comforting component for me. So if you just indulge with me and join me in one of his prayers that he would provide at a lot of our community events. So I thank you. So let me see if I can get this started.
Let us pray to the four directions: the east, the south, the west, norte. The east represents the light of wisdom, illumination, freshness, peace, and understanding. From the south comes the power of life, brutality, growth, and warmth. From the west represents of maturity, autumn, rain, snow, thunder, and also death, or the quality of things coming to an end. And from the north comes the cold, purifying winds, the cleansing of austerity, the strength of endurance, and the white snows and hairs of old age. Nawiha, Aok, Anek, Tamik, Kwata, Tayai, Hanuka, Aho.
Thank you.
Thank you for that, Matt. So before again, I just wanted to just give for those of you who are new to the webinar, the goal of this project, it's been set up by Alta C, the LA Coalition for Economy and Jobs, Santa Monica College, and Cal State University Northridge, which is where I'm at. And the goal of the project is to shine a light on the emerging aquaculture sector in our economy. Aquaculture and supporting technologies bring together all key ingredients, future growth opportunities that support our coastal ecosystems, the economy, jobs, and our communities. This webinar series reimagines partnerships between business, government, universities, and communities through regenerative ocean research, exploration, and equity-based economic development. So I'm honored to be part of this series, but particularly to host our two speakers today, Matthew Tutimes and Rhiannon Chandler Yao. And first I'm going to introduce Rhiannon, and then I'll introduce Matthew. So Rhiannon earned her BA in Ethnic Studies from the University of Hawaii at Manoa in 2004, and graduated from the William S. Richardson School of Law in 2016 with certificates in both Native Hawaiian and environmental law. After graduating, she worked as a post-JD research and teaching fellow at Kahuli Au Center for Excellence in Native Hawaiian Law, and as the executive director of Wai'i Ola Waterkeepers, Hawaiian Islands. Prior to attending law school, Rhiannon served as the executive director of the environmental nonprofit Community Workday program. While on Maui, Rhiannon served as a member of the Maui Nui Marine Resource Council, the Maui County Cultural Resources Commission, board member of the Maui Nonprofit Directors Association, and a steering committee member of the Ka'ipu Kukui Fellows Leadership Program. She currently serves as the Aquaculture Extension Specialist for the Pacific Aquaculture and Coastal Resources Center at University of Hawaii Hilo, where she channels her past experiences into current efforts to protect and preserve natural resources. Thank you, Rhiannon, for coming. Our other speaker today is Matthew Tutimes, who has over 20 years experience in large-scale endangered and rare species surveys, NEPA and CEQA documentation, wetland jurisdictional delineations, vegetation mapping, restoration monitoring, wildlife assessments, and report documentation, as well as over 15 years of experience in long-term monitoring and management for some of Southern California's rarest bird species. As Matthew mentioned before, he's a son of John Tutimes Jr., elder of the Keats-Gabrielino Band of Mission Indians, and where he's an enrolled member of the nation and has served as a tribal biologist since 2010. Mr. Tutimes has been designated by his tribe to possess and share Keats-Gabrielino cultural knowledge and practices taught to him by Chief Ernie Tutimes Salas, along with multiple family elders of the Keats-Gabrielino tribe. Matthew received both his bachelor's of science degree and master's of science degree in biology from Cal State University Long Beach, and is a tribe specialist in ethnobotanical and cultural uses of native plants and animals, including the prehistoric distributions of natural resources throughout the ancestral territory of the Keats-Gabrielino tribe. Mr. Tutimes is also a committee member on California's EPA Tribal Advisory Committee, where he works with the state's environmental boards, departments, and offices to support tribal involvement in environmental concerns and provides traditional ecological knowledge for state agencies to enhance their environmental policies to work towards restoring, preserving, and protecting the natural environment for future generations. So welcome to you both. Both of you have a wide range and intersecting interests, and just an amazing, both have amazing stories and backgrounds. And so I'd like to turn it over to you first, Rhiannon, and then to just maybe do a deeper dive on your bio and some of the work you're focused on now, and then turn it over to you, Matthew, and then we could, just for the audience, we'll have about 20 minutes of some pre-scripted questions that we've all looked at, and then we'll open it up to Q&A for the remaining time. So I'll turn it over to you.
Mahalo. Aloha. Again, my name is Rhiannon. Tereari'i is my middle name, and I was born on Oahu. I am a descendant of a family that has lived here in the Pacific Islands for millennia. And so it is a great honor to be able to carry the message of environmental stewardship forward now through somewhat of a Western lens and my legal training, but marrying all of those things together for essentially our sustainability on these islands, and the idea that we could continue to perpetuate our cultural practices through the preservation of the natural resources that form the foundation of that. So my family is from the island of Hawaii, which is the main island here in the Hawaiian Islands, as well as the island of Maui. And I've worked on all of those islands, including Oahu, during my time working in natural resources. So after graduating from undergrad, I spent about 10 years working in the community mostly on Maui, on land-based issues and the intersection of land-based pollution and marine health. And then as I was serving on the Cultural Resources Commission, we saw many archaeological impact statements and cultural impact assessments coming to us for proposed developments. And oftentimes I found that they did not adequately capture the devastation that would occur from the development or the resources that were going to be impacted. And so I chose to go to law school because I just wanted to understand what lawyers knew, not necessarily that I wanted to practice law, but I didn't want to be told that something was possible or impossible and not know for myself what was true. And so I pursued law school and degrees in environmental law and Native Hawaiian rights law so that I could basically be able to do the things that I felt most passionate about in my community. And so after graduating from law school, I worked for some time at the Native Hawaiian Law Center and had the privilege of co-teaching the water law class as well as the Native Hawaiian Rights Clinic. And through that work have helped with stream flow restoration and being able to allocate stream water to taro farmers to be able to continue their traditional cultural practices. Many people are aware of Hawaii's plantation history, that we're a place where sugar and pineapple were grown, but not too many people know that that really devastated more than 200,000 acres of the land and drained nearly all the water from almost 300 rivers. And even though a lot of those plantations are no longer in existence, many of those streams are still drained by the same entities who own the plantations, who now seek to use that water for development of houses. And so there are many challenges within our community that I seek to basically stand with the people in order to overcome. And in part, that is why I created the first waterkeeper organization in the state of Hawaii, Waiwaiola Waterkeepers Hawaiian Islands, which is dedicated to fishable, swimmable, drinkable water and an avenue to be able to use some of the legal tools that I have to apply to some of the issues that I've learned. And in that, I was introduced to Dr. Maria Haas, who is a phenomenal shellfish expert in the state of Hawaii. And we've been able to introduce some bioremediation projects using oysters to filter and improve water quality. So it's beautiful because we are able to return a native species to the water that was very low in population when we started. And at the same time allow it to impact water quality positively and gain traction within the government and the community to recognize the state of our water quality in our nearshore areas. And it has been really an honor to do that work. And thank you so much for inviting me today. Aloha.
Thanks so much. Matthew, I'll turn it over to you.
I love all that stuff, Rhiannon. That was beautiful stuff you get to involve yourself in, and the coastlines that are important to the sustenance or the sustainability of life on that island. And that's exactly where our tribe is coming from in our participation in a lot of this. For me personally, it just so happens that our tribal lineage derives from where I grew up, and that reality, or I should say where I grew up, where I got my biological expertise. And that reality of doing my master's, and my bachelor's at the same school in Long Beach has allowed me to understand a lot of the traditional information that my uncle has provided for not just myself, but all of, our generation and our tribe. And that component has provided for a lot of, I guess, just what we think is just common sense information that needs to be put forth in a lot of these planning efforts and things of that sort. In my time that I get to work at the state level with CaliPA, our California's Environmental Protection Agency, that sort of coordination and involvement helps me realize, because we're just a standard family. We just have a lineage that it's a beautiful lineage. I wish my cousin, our chairman, was here to help shower you with the beautiful lineage that has occurred, because our tribe's lineage derives from a top leader that's historically recorded from the San Gabriel area, Nicholas Joseph, and then through the different eras of occupation that we've had in California, being when the Spanish came in here. Then during that era, those families ended up coming into contact with our lineage and having babies. And those were the top Spanish generals and stuff that occurred. And then when the Mexican era came in, the Mexican families that came in to help call Los Angeles, derived within our tribe's lineage. And then when the Americans came in, the top American families, one being my uncle, who you heard in the prayer, he actually used to live with General George S. Patton, who is the grandson of Benjamin D. Wilson of Mount Wilson, what we call Mount Wilson, that's what they named it after, and Ramona Yorba, who her family was in the Yorba Linda area, and that's what that's named after. And so these prominent families were part of our tribe's lineage, which helped the survival of our tribe through these decimating generations of time for the native people in California. And so that component has allowed for my uncle's, his, I don't want to say his purpose, but pretty much his purpose was to speak for the plants and animals of our land. And that has drawn into our generation. And that's why we accept anytime we get to talk about these resources, because the aquaculture question is a interesting question from our perspective. And we're going to get, of course, more into this, but it's pretty much, I come from a knowledge of traditional ideas about it. And then there's also the scientific knowledge that I've learned being a biologist in our local area about the detrimations that, or the unfortunate things that have happened to our environment here. So those conversations will be exciting to have. But just pretty much from our perspective, we're just a local tribe that's trying to protect and preserve our last remaining resources. And these natural resources have provided sustenance and sustainability for humans for thousands of years. And only in the last few decades have we lost our hold on the ability to benefit from these resources. And so that part we want as a tribe, that's our effort to try and get, you know, some of that to return to benefit our future generations, so that they can have actually something that was provided for our creator that man has taken away.
Wow. You know, what I noticed, Matthew, I'm very familiar with your work, especially, and Rihanna, you mentioned cultural resource management, kind of your work as a kind of stopping or documenting and protecting cultural resources that were, you know, that were being threatened by development, right? And this is, of course, I know Matthew has a lot of work in this, and this is kind of has helped fuel a lot of the tribe's efforts. A lot of it's about protecting and restoring. And I know we have these scripted questions I want to ask you, but if it's okay, I'd like to start with that. Actually, maybe if both of you could comment on a little bit more about, you know, aquaculture, and this theme for this webinar is about regeneration, and it's, you know, moving beyond sustainability, right? Kind of taking it to the next level and thinking about, obviously we still need to do a lot of work, especially when we talk about the ocean. We're still in a triage, right, zone, if you will. But how do both of the communities you work with, or you just individually, think about maybe aquaculture, but also just larger traditional ecological knowledge as both a kind of a restorative, you know, protecting resources, as well as a tool for non-native folks who are, you know, the first time they might be have even heard of the term traditional ecological knowledge, and think about that. And how do you think about that? Maybe how do the communities that you work with also think about that? Rihanna, if you want to take the first stab at that.
Sure. So if I understand correctly, it's how does traditional ecological knowledge impact our approach to aquaculture, or thoughts?
Yeah. So maybe that, and also, I guess, how do you think about the kind of the corrective, you know, the opportunities for corrective, ecological corrective, but also a tool for regeneration and for the way forward.
Sure. So, I think it's important to note that aquaculture is not really a new term in Hawaii. It's a very ancient practice. And so I think we have a lot to add to the conversation about cultivating any kind of life in the marine areas. And it's important to involve not even just native people, but local people. I think a lot of people have a concept that they want to do a project in a certain location, but unless you're from that place, you don't really understand how the currents move or seasonally what is going to impact that. And so I think traditional knowledge and also local knowledge really impact decision making. And really, I would always advise someone to start first there. Hawaiians and Polynesians really practice a technique called kilo, which is observation. And through observing the natural systems, I think that over millennia, we've learned to work with them instead of against them. And so a lot of traditional forms of aquaculture are really managing for abundance, harvesting in accordance with seasons and spawning, and not allowing there to be take of anything, during times when it's reproducing. I think fish ponds are a really excellent example of Native Hawaiian aquaculture, in that they occur where the river meets the ocean. And in that area, there is so much life in the estuary. The seaweeds grow and the baby fish come to the river mouth. And in many areas, that area is walled off. The water is with usually rocks and coral kind of almost cemented away from the external part of the ocean. So you create this like near shore separate area that is now tidally different. And so when the tide is high outside the fish pond wall, the tide is still low inside the pond. And we know that fish swim against the current. And so anytime the tide is high outside the pond wall, you can open the gates and the ocean water will flow into the pond. And then the fish inside the pond will swim against the current and try to escape out into the ocean. But the wall is built in such a way that you can drop the gates and trap the fish there, right? As they're trying to exit. And so it's a way of fishing without having to go out into the open ocean, especially when sometimes seasonally you can't always go out into the water. And so bringing things closer to you, making them safer and making them more accessible are just kind of, I think Matt used common sense knowledge. I think there's a lot of common sense practices that could be brought into natural resource management that are within the experience of traditional peoples. And I think that integrating aquaculture in a way that it's more a part of the environment instead of something that is introduced into the environment or something that is really, chemically, biologically, or physically foreign to that area, usually it's not going to end up as well. I think we understand that nature has its own rhythms, and humans trying to manipulate that almost never goes well. And so I think working in harmony with the natural systems and trying to support abundance is an approach that we have. We have a saying, He ali'ika aina, he kaua ke kanaka, which means the land is the chief and the people are its servant. And I feel like if we all abided by that, if we realized that the natural resources are so important, they're way more important than us, and so many times we sacrifice natural resources for our own benefit. But the truth is, if we don't have those natural resources, we as humans will no longer be able to exist on the planet. I think that Native people just understand that from a more intimate place because we've depended so thoroughly on those resources. We haven't had the luxury of mass, continental, expansive agriculture. On tiny islands, we have to live within our means. And so I think it just heightens our need that way.
Yeah, Matthew.
Awesome, Rhiannon. Just to build off what's been said, there's two kind of different, like when folks ask, hey, traditional ecological knowledge, tell me a little bit about that. A lot of time it's, and I'm trying to explain this kind of quickly, I'm trying to do this, but this is actually a conversation that we can have for hours. And here's the reality of what I feel when folks ask us about traditional ecological knowledge is, hey, how do we manipulate the land to do what we want? How did you guys manipulate the land to do what you want? And one thing that Rhiannon said, which was exactly the way we think, is this land is actually older than us, our elders. When something's older than you, and this goes along with our origin story, in the sequence of time when the creator placed, the earth and then the plants and then the animals, it was all before humans, all before us. And so therefore, when something is older than you, it's your elder and it's meant for you to learn from. And it's meant to teach us. And that's the component, that's the honor and appreciation that doesn't occur in the thought process when we think of farming or even aquaculture. It's this farming idea, and to go back to our landscape, the LA Basin, farming was not a component of how you lived on this landscape. That idea of not having reliance on what the creator is going to provide you and having to farm your own stuff, that just wasn't a necessity here. The creator provided everything. In other areas in the desert, you had to farm, you had to create these food staples during these famine times. Here in the LA Basin, that didn't occur, and that didn't occur within our water systems. So you have these two kind of different concepts on how to utilize the land. And that's where, from our perspective, aquaculture is something that, exactly what Rhiannon said, it was a management of the abundance. It wasn't a management of the resource. And so that reality meant that we had working systems that were always going here. In terms of our hydrology, why did we have to channelize all of our river systems and stuff in the LA Basin? It's because of our dramatic hydrology that was here for a purpose, and it was here to flush out toxins that happened during our drought seasons, renew our upland areas with nutrients, recede back into the land. Anyway, all these cycles that have been put in place on our landscape are all a part of how the land interacts with the ocean. And for us to farm it, we have gone into an area that's already producing for us, and we have manipulated it in a way to have a reason to have to farm now. And that's where, I guess, is the concept difference that we're bringing to the table, is in this aquaculture discussion that we're having, instead of saying, hey, what can we farm here? We would prefer to say, hey, what is the land supporting that can be supported for a management of the abundance? And that reality will then change the ecology of that whole system. Because here, just real quick, one of the concepts is abalone. Just to give you some historic perspective on abalone, you can actually go to Taos, New Mexico right now. And in those mountainous regions, there's a ancient clan of people there that call themselves the Shell people, or the Abalone clan. This ancient civilization of people self-identified themselves to a single shellfish that came from our shores, just showing the prolificness of how this commodity and how this resource was transported throughout our landscape and was coveted by humans all over the land. And that reality shows the abundance that occurred on our landscape, so much so that a whole civilization, all their regalia, all their ceremony was surrounded by shells, because there was so much abundance, and they lived thousands of miles away. So that sort of concept reality of what it used to be just decades ago. And this is the crazy part. This is just decades, not centuries. This is decades ago that we had this ability to get the benefits from our landscape. But today, because of the disruptions that have happened, such as, real quick, with the abalone, we had tons of abalone. It lives in our rocky intertidal areas and in our benthic lower areas. Well, all of our benthic areas also had little craggly areas. That's where the abalone can come and get in and crevice themselves with their big foot, because the foot's what we want to eat. That's the muscle. That's the beautiful steak that the abalone produces. Well, in that form, because we've had all of our terrestrial practices over these past decades of channelizing all of our water and all of our sediment, we've now filled in all the benthic areas, at least within our continental shelf area along the southern coast, so that abalone can't even grow there anymore. So it's that fact that it's like, hey, we want to harvest these things, we want to create these things in aquaculture, but we have reduced and minimized our habitat and our available locations for them, that it's like we're already getting on a broken cycle here, and we want to have it still produce stuff for us. We got to start thinking about how we're fixing the cycle and managing the abundance, rather than trying to get something out of it that it's having a hard time producing ecologically right now. Anyway, we can go on and on. I'm just going off on tangents right now, but let's get back to our main discussion.
Well, that's it. This is your tangents are spot on. So they're not tangential at all. Thank you, Matthew. Well, so this is actually a related question. I know we still have our scripted questions here, but Meredith had a question about, kind of related to what you're thinking about alliances, right? And thinking about, how do we get folks to think about policy and regulation. So her question is, have you had interactions with policymaking in your work? How can and does traditional knowledge inform and impact federal and state policies and regulations, vis-a-vis your, the efforts from your communities? I don't know whoever wants to jump in first.
Ladies first, but I'm willing to go for it.
Oh, sure. Go ahead, Matt.
Thank you, Rhiannon. So interaction with state agencies, at least here in California, fortunately from our tribal government, we've been able to interact at that level. And what my experience is everyone wants tribes to be involved, but no one knows what they're doing, or even what to ask the tribes on how to be involved. Because many times, and I'll just say this right now, we're considered tokens. Hey, we have the tribal, participation, but the decision making is still in the line of the old way of thinking of how do we manage and manipulate the land to do what we want it to do for us. And that's never the traditional management of land. Is you don't force it, you don't pound it or destroy it, when you don't understand it. You work alongside of it. You learn about each other. This is like, here, one simple thing. Going back to our abalone discussion, because kelp, this is something that our tribe is, I'm getting our youth involved. We're actually doing a whole trip on June 25th regarding a lot of our estuaries and stuff, because we have some really unique habitats, which is why us in Hawaii, we actually share this title, or you guys are the top, unfortunately, of the highest amount of endangered species in your land base. You have the top, and I think Southern California, we're number 2 or number 3, I forget. But anyway, that reality has shown just the biodiversity that our landscapes provided for. And why did it provide for these biodiversities? Because you had all these intricate cycles that were already set in place. For one, our sea otter with kelp and with abalone. Abalone, what does it need? It needs kelp to eat. That's what it's eating. All this little kelp would fly by, and then the abalone would grab on and have its little, suction part and get the nutrients from that plant that's growing. Why does it need a sea otter? A sea otter will actually help to eliminate a lot of the herbivores that are eating the kelp. And one of those herbivores being, what do we like to eat in the sushi restaurants? Real spiky. Oh, what are those? Sea urchins. Yeah. Sea urchins will decimate a whole area of kelp that will remove the competition for food from the abalone. And so this cycle, what would happen is that then the sea otters would be able to take out the urchins, and they also hunt abalone as well, but the abalone would have these little crevices that they could hide. And sea urchins are actually movable. They move where abalone don't. They're sessile. So that difference makes it so that there's already this, give and take that's already put in place that allow for this abundance to occur, because it was self-regulating. The whole cycle was self-regulating. We've now taken out those regulatory, components of it. And now we're trying to still have that cycle produce for us these components that we want to farm. And that's the part that we say as a tribal, entity is saying, hold on, let's understand the landscape first. What are we missing? And what do we have to support to it in order to get this benefit or these resources in an abundance that we can now, what it's supposed to do, provide for us, for the humans. That's why our creator put it here. I mean, all the beautiful flavors we're missing out on in our, you know, shellfish and stuff, and just everything that is within our marine environment that was a necessity for the culture that lived in the LA basin. Very similar, and actually there's even academic reports or whatever that show or that help to identify the population on the California coast could have interacted with the Polynesian islands and with Hawaii, because the dress and the regalia is very similar to the Hawaiian dress and regalia that occurred within our landscape, because the ocean was just such an important part. And for us as a tribe to get back to aquaculture, to get back to this connection of a entity that is so important, that was part of the cycle that has been removed from us, that is a huge deal for all the Native communities along the coast. Because if you notice, at least within the politics of our tribal area, there are no federally recognized tribes along our California coast from the Central Coast down to Mexico. And there's a purpose behind that, because that's all our beautiful lands and stuff like that. But anyway, that's a side discussion. But you know, for the biology, we're working with a broken system, and how we're going to get this system to produce something with aquaculture is going to be difficult unless we try and go to the simplicity of just allowing it to do it and us supporting it. Sorry, Rhiannon, I took so much time. Please.
No, I agree with everything that you said. And most importantly, the concept of almost tokenizing, you know, Native involvement. I think I see that a lot in Hawaii, and also that we are a consensus-based culture. You know, even our chiefs wouldn't really make decisions by themselves. They would always have a council. And so the idea of taking one person, and often maybe the one Hawaiian who you feel agrees with you, and putting them on that committee so that you can continue to have buy-in, you know, for whatever, or authority or permission, you know, for whatever is being put forward, is really offensive. I mean, it creates so much division even within the Native Hawaiian community. And so I would really encourage anybody who wants to involve Native people to not just never involve just one Native individual. You know, I think it's really bad for that person, even if they don't realize that it is bad for them. You should have several to give different points on the compass. And I think that, you know, in terms of how we influence policy, it's a little sad. You know, we really don't influence policy. If you look at, you know, natural resources management and what influences it, it's mostly economy. It's not Native perspective. I think that, you know, we've only had one Native Hawaiian governor in the history of Hawaii. We don't have the political traction really to make those kinds of decisions. And so when you talk about Native Hawaiian policymaking, it's actually just sort of only when those in power bend to the Native people to include them is when we get to have a say at the table. And oftentimes, you know, we try to do that through our elders. And there's been some acknowledgement through the Department of Land and Natural Resources of the value of having sort of elder spokespeople for different regions, and that that has gained some traction, although has caused a lot of infighting. I don't know, I think it's hard to work with Native people. You know, sometimes we're, you know, the Hawaiians, they never were really united. I mean, Kamehameha united the islands for a short time right before the missionaries came, and that sort of became what statehood is today. But for you know, almost the entire history of Hawaii, they were separately governed and separately ruled and had different opinions about how things should be done. So it's not really fair to take one Hawaiian and suggest that that's how all things are done or should be done. I think there needs to be more diverse representation. And so I appreciate that question. Mahalo.
Yeah, just to kind of bounce, I'm sorry, Nat, if you want
No,
to
go, please.
just to kind of bounce off that, nobody speaks for another nation. Like, we all speak for ourselves, and that respect has always been amongst nations. And so that reality for us has been where many folks will utilize one individual to speak on behalf of many, and that in the coordination and communication with tribes is just, it fails all the time because every tribe needs to speak for themselves. So that may take some extra effort on the, part of agencies, but that's the part that needs to happen in order to get a true perspective of tribal concerns and different part of that. So just to also go over how can traditional knowledge inform and impact federal and state policies and regulations, just give you a quick story of how one of our stories was told, but it's probably about 3 years ago now, at a meeting in Sacramento with our Air Resources Board. They were explaining to us, and this is all different tribal nations that are represented in our EPA Council, that they were creating these little, let me back up just real quick. As part of California's clean air policies, we have to remove all of our greenhouse gases by the year 2050. That's one of the goals. So with that, the Air Resources Board was creating all these little sensors to place within areas to help get a baseline assessment, as well as to see, how we are moving towards that goal. And so our tribal nation, we raised our hands and said, well, do you know that we have a plant that does the same thing? And they look back at us and say, huh? And I explained, because it just so happened that I was part of a project in South Orange County where we were utilizing black sage as an indicator of harmful gases, being mainly sulfur dioxide that came out of a treatment plant that was next door. But what the coincidence is sulfur dioxide is also one of the main gases that come out of our tailpipe that are part of our greenhouse gases. So by understanding how a black sage leaf sclerotizes or hardens or reduces its water, we can actually measure the amount of sulfur dioxide in the air through the interactions that it has with the plant. So that reality says, hey, instead of getting all these raw materials and creating all these sensors that you're not going to use these things for in the future, why not start growing some of our plants, some of our coastal sage scrub plants that will be the sensors as well? We just got to learn how to utilize them as our markers, as our sensors. So that was told to them 3 years ago. Has that discussion ever gone forward, or has anybody ever said, hey, let's look into this? Oh no, our state money created the sensors. We're using raw materials. They're doing the same process. And that's something that Rhiannon perfectly hit on, is that when we get invited, we're included into a table that already exists with everyone's minds already made up. It's not like we can change the minds of those at that table. We never get to invite people to our table, or we never get to have a communal table that exists for the purpose of the two communities coming together. It's always us being invited to someone else's table. And until that concept even, changes into something where, hey, we're doing this together, we're always invited as just another voice. And for some reason, everyone's interested in this traditional ecological knowledge, which all that is understanding that we should have a reliance on what the Creator gave us and not be reliant on man. And when we start relying on what the Creator gave us, we'll start helping support all these ecological cycles that the Creator put here. But and think about how man supports us. When we have, our medicine comes from all these stores, our food comes from all these stores, and when they are gone, where's our food coming from? Where's our medicine coming from? Well, our tribe fortunately still grows some of our food and still creates some of our medicine out of our native plants. And that's the reality. We've already been provided all this food medicine. It's provided for humans for thousands of years on this landscape. Why only through these few decades does our generation think it can't do it? So the story of aquaculture for us is a bigger story of how we need to get back to honoring and respecting our land base, our landscape, because of the one who put it here for our benefit, which is our Creator. And that's who we need to give our reverence to and our honor back to. And that doesn't happen when it comes in the decisions for our land base. I'll get off my soapbox now. Sorry.
That's beautiful. Thank you. Well, maybe we can continue with that. And by the way, as feel free, audience, to chat questions. But I have a couple. I wanted to maybe continue with this question about the table, like you said. And so you mentioned, and this maybe we'll start with you, Rihanna, and then we'll turn back to Matthew. Maybe some of the projects or some of the initiatives that your communities are thinking about, especially Matthew mentioned the youth, maybe just curious how folks from within think about aquaculture. I mean, obviously you talked a little bit about the kind of larger, philosophical and ecological issues, but just in terms of just what you think as a tool for building tribal sovereignty, finding more opportunities for your community, and maybe if you could talk a little bit about some of those initiatives.
Sure. I mentioned briefly the Hawaiian fish ponds. They are actually unique in the Pacific Ocean in terms of their engineering and maintenance. And really, it shows a extremely high level of observation of the natural environment and really working with the natural environment in order to sustain life. We would never have been able to have the populations that we have. On some islands, the populations were equal to what they are today pre-contact. And that was without any stores, as Matt said, or any, pharmacies or any Costco or anything like that. Our environment completely sustained the populations that are on some of the islands today. And now we import nearly 90% of our food. And so the switch has been so dramatic, and really it's become crippling, and we are so reliant. And I think to speak to what you just asked, really self-determination begins with self-sufficiency. I think if you cannot sustain your own local food production, then you're always going to be dependent on somebody else, and you give your power away. And so I think to our youth, we've really been focusing on that, making that transition to return to traditional sources of food cultivation, but a lot of that has been interrupted. A lot of the land that was formerly used is not available, and water quality has deeply impacted the ability to do aquaculture in some of the ways that we formerly did. And for instance, the fish ponds are now very impaired because the way that they're designed, they're at the bottom of a river, that empties out into the ocean. So now if that river is impaired, which many of our rivers are impaired, then the waters that are receiving, are impaired as well. And so is the food. And so a lot of effort has been taken under probably the last 10 to 20 years to examine the fish ponds, to address some of the water quality issues, and to bring the youth to get involved and to begin to care about these resources and their health. And so now today, it's really a huge revolution that you can even go to a fish pond and visit them and see them in operation. When I was a child, there were not working fish ponds available to go and visit, but now thousands of children every year visit these fish ponds, and the fish ponds produce fish, produce crab, seaweed, all kinds of things that are things that subsistence, fishers and Native Hawaiian people, rely on the ocean, and to be able to gather that for our families. And so we've been almost cut off sort of from these resources by either pollution or lack of access. And so the fish ponds really reestablish a relationship that is so important, and also that that ability to really care and sustain for your community, and be able to then have enough strength and foundation to begin making choices and decisions, and have that idea of self-determination. So mahalo.
That's great. Matthew, yeah.
I just echo those words. Beautiful. In terms of our youth wanting to participate, of course, yes. But we have the hurdles that Rhiannon just so expertly explained. There's no spots to actually do these activities. We actually, our tribal government is part of a process right now within California. There's designating, the water agencies are designating different waterways with tribal beneficial use definitions, meaning that if these were areas where, you had fishing, sustainable fishing, you had ceremony, different things, what type of ceremony within the, because we had ceremonies within our water areas and things of that sort. And that reality for us going through this exercise now of, identifying these water courses, it's like, yeah, these water courses had this ability, but they're all concrete now, and so we don't have now the access or even the ecology to be able to, get these traditional activities as part of our youth programs and education programs. But we're trying in any little spots we can to help in that effort, not just for our youth, for everybody. And that's one concept that my uncle always put into our head. And this is the concept of decision making in terms of for land bases or anything of that sort. He says, if you're making a decision that only affects you yourself, then you can choose whatever you want. But if you make a decision that affects others or affects future generations, you have to think 7 generations ahead of how it's going to affect them, and it should benefit them. And so today, our generation needs to start making those decisions on how we're going to support our landscape to benefit our grandkids, because that's truly the generations that probably will realize a lot of the stuff that even we have memories of that we're losing. And so if we can start now, our generation now, in that pursuit, it'll be a beautiful gift to leave to our future ones.
Wow, that's amazing. So maybe to kind of, and again, we've got about 9 minutes, and I want to respect our speakers' time. So if anyone in the audience has any questions, just again, feel free to chat it. But maybe if I could ask both of you, are there any particular, I mean, you mentioned bivalve, you mentioned abalone, and a little bit about some of the fish in the aquaponds. Are there any particular species or methods? I mean, again, you touched on both of these that you're working with or thinking about or really excited about, or that seems a path forward for some of these, especially for around sovereignty and thinking about consensus, what the community is really behind. Are there any other things that you want to share or talk about? Brianna, if you want to go first.
So I mentioned briefly the Native Oyster Project that we have with Dr. Maria Haas, and I think that is a important facet of both the concept of managing cultural resources and also this idea of aquaculture leading to sustainable food production. We have to start somewhere in Hawaii with our poor water quality. And so we are sort of tackling 2 things at once with the oyster restoration, because it's both a population restoration and a water quality remediation project. The native oysters are, at one point in time, there were more than 216 types of bivalves in Hawaii that were native. And today it is almost, it's very difficult to find any, to be honest, on the shoreline, but I can think of about 5 types that you can find if you really, really, really hunt around. But that leaves 211 types that you cannot regularly find. And it's really sad. And so the native oyster, Dendrostraea sandwichensis, is a smaller oyster, kind of along the lines of the West Coast Olympia oyster. But it has been used to provide a basis. It's a key member of the food chain here, and it is also a filter feeder. And so we have initiated a project in partnership with Pearl Harbor, as well as the Marine Corps base and some of the yacht clubs, to be able to put oysters out into the water for remediation. Not only for the idea that they're going to clean the water, but for the idea that we need to pay attention to what's happening in the water. I think that, the oysters are not the silver bullet that are gonna solve all of our water quality issues, but at some point we need to pay attention to what's happening and attempt to slow the flow of pollution from the land. And so the oysters are really almost ambassadors in the water to let us know that things are not going well. They're a conversation starter for our community and also for our government to be able to say, hey, let's look at how stormwater drains into the ocean. Let's look at cleaning up some of these wastewater issues. And so we have taken steps on those levels, to address the land-based issues as a result of the oyster project. And the oyster project itself has been very inspiring in terms of the amount of recruitment we've had. We were blown away within months. We were like blasted with oyster babies just everywhere around our site. And we hadn't really thought that was going to happen. We thought our oysters were going to be cleaning the water. We had not even really thought about the fact that we'd be making more oysters for more water quality benefit, and really to be able to aggregate those bivalves in one area gave them so much opportunity, to be able to reproduce. Because you think about types of animals that spawn, right? We have the black-lip pearl oyster, and on the Big Island, you can find one black-lip pearl oyster on the shoreline, and maybe like a mile down the shore snorkeling, you'll find another black-lip pearl oyster. But if they're broadcasting their genetic material into the water, things have to be almost perfect for the currents to align now, for them to meet each other, because there's just so few individuals. So being able to aggregate them, allowing them to reproduce more readily, and then to be able to reclaim their position in our ecosystem, to support, everything above them, and to help to clarify the water. It's been a really important project, I think, to look at the role that natural resources play in so many different levels, to the environment they serve, to the people who are connected to them. These are shellfish that are a part of our genealogy, as Matt said, these the land is our elder, but so are many of the species, and these shellfish are actually, considered to be our ancestors and older than us, and to be revered. And so I think that this project is a good reminder of taking care of one species and the impacts that can come from that.
Thank you.
100% echo. And I think the main concept that we're trying to bring to our youth, because as we say, we don't have many opportunities right now, but it's that idea of spending time, of learning your landscape, spending time in these areas. And one effort that we're actually doing right now is learning how to scuba dive. We have a nonprofit that's helped organize an ability for us to teach our youth how to scuba dive, so we can then do citizen science tracking on our kelp forests. Because the kelp within our intertidal area is one of the most important components for sustaining a lot of other different parts of it. And to get the interaction with these natural resources and with what we consider gifts of our creator, that's when you start then having that understanding of the simplicity of, hey, there's some differences here. Why is this area different from this area? Then you start saying, oh, this is having a lot of toxins being produced in it, and a lot of, matter. Anyway, we need to spend time, and it's the same thing. That's exactly what Rhiannon was going to. All these are considered our elders to learn from. And what are they trying to teach us right now? They're trying to teach us to spend time with each other, to learn from each other. It's during those times, just like our family, during that family time, you need to actually sit down and spend time. That's one thing this current generation isn't figuring out, is to have that quality time, not on your little devices, but face to face, eye to eye. And that's the reality of what we need, not only with our own social context, but also with our environment. And our generation's been so displaced of spending that time with our environment that we don't know how it works now. And now we're going to Indian tribes and saying, hey guys, how does this work? Just spend some time with it. It's simple. You just got to use your time to value it, to honor it, and not always expect it to honor you. And that's the main concept that we flow with. And, it deserves our honor and our respect. And we'll hold true to that all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. We've got 1 minute left. I don't know if is it I want to respect your time, but there's a specific question about red urchins, if that's okay. I'll throw it out to you.
Sure. I would actually maybe address the red urchin question to Matt.
Okay.
We do have a collector urchin that we work with for invasive limu control, but not necessarily as a food source. But to go to the question before that, are the hunting and fishing rights included in your treaties, written land agreements? It's important to note that Hawaii is not a federally recognized people. And it's actually quite sad because that means that we don't have the protections that other tribes have on the continent, and we don't have the rights to our resources or, to fish or to hunt or to protect them the way that other tribes do. And I always want to share that with people because we've been fighting for many, many decades, actually ever since statehood. Before statehood, ever since annexation, we've been fighting for any kind of ability to be, a co-manager of our land, but that's never happened. And I want to pass it over to Matt for his thoughts on the red urchins.
I'm glad you got to answer that question. Thanks.
Yes, thank you for answering that, because we're in the same situation as being a non-federal tribe. So with the red urchins, yeah, it's all about understanding your resources. And, there's been studies that have shown that in an area where you have sea otters, red urchin, and abalone, it's that interaction that they all do for each other that helps to support. In one spot, they found that, and I don't know if it's red urchin, but one species of urchin was dominant in an area that was excluded from the sea otters, because they weren't, and so that then lowered the amount of abalone because the urchins were kind of dominating the whole area. So it's those sort of changes that when we understand our resources that we've been provided, we can help understand why these things are happening. And then that's the managing part. It's you already have a good bike. Why are you trying to turn it into a, something else? So anyway, I don't know if that answers specifically what you were asking, but yeah, those are the concepts that, hey, you learn about it, then we can make better decisions about our management practices.
It gets to your point about listening, sitting with the family, right? I think that's real key. Yeah. Well, I think that's a great way to end. It's 5:01, and I wanted to again honor your time and thank you so much for just an amazing conversation and for your insight. And this will be recorded for everyone who's listening. I'll be on the Alta Sea website, and I'm looking forward to more conversations and hopefully, and we'll see you both soon. Definitely see Matthew soon. Hopefully see you on the Big Island at some point too. Rihanna. Thank you so much, everyone. Thanks to you both. And hopefully this will be scheduled again our third webinar next week at the same time. So hope to see you all then.
Yeah.
Bye-bye,
Thank you
everybody.
all for your time.
Thanks, Matthew.